Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Campus Dialogues. This is the forum for news and public interest matters by Muslim views in looking at local and international affairs of public interest. And today we have a special guest who has been awarded a medal by the South African Universities Forum in his work on social justice and transformation at universities.
The Science for Society Gold Medal recognizes my leadership, scholarship, philanthropic grant-making, and activism in realizing prosperous, equitable, vibrant, intellectually and socially diverse, inclusive, and democratic societies. I deeply appreciate the Academy's recognition and reward. But the enduring spirit of my work means that I must express tonight my strong dismay at both the Academy and Universities of South Africa's appalling and shameful silence on Israel's barbarous genocide, scholasticide, and epistemicide in Palestine with Western support. We witness all this in real time, but we remain silent and become complicit. Is it more scientific evidence that we seek? The artist Anton Brink writes that our personal, social, political, and cultural dogmas have made a kind of comfort zone for our minds, free of responsibilities of choice, seemingly. We conspire to make a particular kind of world, and yet we regard ourselves as not involved. Our universities, USAF and the Academy, should be leading solidarity work with devastated Palestinian universities, scholars, and students. That we are not exemplifies all that is wrong with science and our universities in this country, and they need to be fundamentally transformed. The Science for Society Gold Medal Awards comes with a generous price. I donate the 20,000 Rand prize to the South African PDS Coalition for solidarity work with Palestine universities, scholars, and students. A good friend counsels that I should hang on to this 9-carat gold medal. It could be future mayor or dowry. Thank you very much.
So welcome, Professor Saleem Badat, who is the recipient of this award. And perhaps I'd like to ask him first to talk to us about his work as an academic, particularly with respect to his commitment to social justice. So Saleem, if you can perhaps start by answering that question, and then we'll talk about the award and what this means broadly for the academia in South Africa and for the public.
Salam, thank you very much. And thank you for Muslim Views for this opportunity to engage with you. So I started university at the age of just over 17. And almost 50 years later, I'm still connected with universities. And my passion throughout almost those 50 years has really been questions of domination and liberation, how societies are reproduced, how societies are transformed, how certain systems are maintained, and how do we get rid of those systems in the interests of the majority of the people. So all my research, my teaching, my writing, over 50 years has focused on those issues. Whether it's looking at Black student politics under apartheid, whether it's looking at the phenomenon of banishment, and as we know, Sheikh Yusuf was banished, or whether it's looking at tennis under apartheid and the exclusion of a Black South African, a very close friend of mine, Hussein Bobat, from Junior Wimbledon in 1971. So my concern has been always around social justice, and that was really bred by my activism as a student activist, as a media activist, as a political activist. Much of it in Cape Town in the 80s and 1990s. So that was really the basis on which you could say I graduated to becoming an academic, becoming a vice chancellor, becoming a head of an advisory body to the minister, spending 5 years in New York as a head of a program funding universities. So it's been very much in my blood, both the knowledge part of it, but knowledge connected with activism for social justice.
That's important. And I think an important position statement that you made actually occurred when you received the award. And you took a very bold and principled stance by being critical of academia generally, of academics who play a neutral or non-committal role when it comes to issues of social justice, but also by the very organization that awarded you this medal. Can you perhaps speak to what possible consequences are there for academics like yourself who take this very principled and bold public stand on Palestine?
That's an important issue. So let me just frame this in a context. This didn't happen overnight, where Saleem just got this award and spoke out. We have been engaging with the Academy of Science for over a year. We have engaged, and I'm a member of that Academy of Science for many years. We have also been engaging with Universities South Africa, which is the representative body of the 26 universities. I used to chair that body at one point when I was Vice Chancellor of Rhodes University. So we've engaged with both these bodies for almost a year now about their shocking silence on Gaza, Palestine, but more generally, right? And up to today, they have not moved. In the case of the Academy, they set up a committee that was going to look into producing a statement, which they have done now.
Mm-hmm.
And we will respond to that statement whether it's adequate. As far as Universities South Africa itself has been concerned, it has virtually done nothing. It hasn't even called as a body for a ceasefire, let alone we could talk about the boycott of Israeli institutions and partnerships with Israeli institutions and so on. So that's the context in which this Science for Society Gold Medal was awarded last Wednesday at a lovely function in Pretoria. And you're right, it's not easy, Mahmoud, to just stand and critique, right? Because for me, critique means three things. One is self-clarification. I need to be clear, rational, thinking about what step I'm taking. The second part is clarification with others, right? So the step I took, I shared it with certain close comrades and friends to say, this is what I'm proposing. And we spoke through that. It's not a maverick decision, And thirdly, it's about making that statement at a function which is meant to be celebratory, right? And not being sure how the audience itself would respond. Because the audience is mainly senior academics, university leaders, and so on, who have not taken a stand, many of them on this issue. Okay. But it was a moment where I thought publicly, given the engagement with the Academy of Science and my critique of them, and they do important work. I want to recognize that also. So it was taking a stand, and then donating the money to the BDS was quite an obvious thing for me. So how does this affect me? So I'm happy to say that it's not likely to affect me a great deal, because I'm coming to the sunset of my career, if you like. Okay? I do whatever research I want. I publish about what I want to do, as long as it is peer reviewed and my peers say this is rigorous academic scholarship and research, right? That's what I must satisfy. I mentor young scholars now. It gives me a lot of fulfillment. I work with PhDs and postdocs, so that's my life, right? But I am different from a young scholar who's just starting out at the university now. For a young scholar to perhaps have done what I did could be the end of their careers, not in the sense of losing their job necessarily, because that we are protected in, thankfully, in South Africa. But they would lose their job if they were in the United States, I can tell you that, or in the UK, or in Germany, and those places. And we must be clear about those places. People are losing their jobs for expressing any solidarity, or for having an exhibition in a museum. People are being cancelled in terms of awards and speaking and so on. So for a young scholar or even someone in a mid-career, this could be quite dangerous for them, especially when it comes to funding and research awards and partnering with academics in mainly the West and so on.
Yeah.
So none of that is going to affect me
Mhm.
because I don't need any of those things in my life. I don't care whether I'm invited to speak in Germany or in the United States or UK
Well,
any
thank you for
longer.
that. That's a very frank response because I think not too many people would acknowledge that they are at the stage of their career where no matter what happens is rather inconsequential. And I think yeah, I'm really pleased that you actually recognize that younger scholars
No, so
do.
I think for other younger scholars who I am mentoring,
Mhm.
in the past few years, I've had over 20 humanities scholars that I hope that I add value to in terms of guiding them in terms of the values of the academy, about what we live for, what kind of work we have to undertake, and so on. That it's a profession. It's not just any occupation. This is a very noble profession. It comes with responsibilities and it comes with values like intellectual autonomy,
Mhm.
contributing to development, maintaining quality, academic freedom, and so on. So I'm very mindful that while Saleem could have done this, many others would balk at doing that. And I wouldn't consider them complicit in that context. I
Right.
understand. I want
Yes.
us to be sympathetic, right? These are
So
people
would
who must
you,
pay bills,
yeah,
and so
actually,
on,
yeah. So would
right?
you say that
So I'm in a different kind of context at the moment. Nothing
yeah,
can really happen to me, in a sense. But I would like to think that what I did last week, I would have done 20 years ago too.
okay, now that's really the point that I'm trying to get at here. Do you think that a intellectual like Edward Said, who wrote in his representations of the intellectual that the scholar, the principled intellectual, is a rather lonely figure because he would criticize and remain independent despite what academia generally, what the public sector and the private sector are saying. And those risks would be undertaken no matter whether he is young or old. Those values
Yeah.
remain enduring. So your views would then, would you agree, resonate with that of Edward Said's?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think as much as universities provide you the academic freedom, and we must remember that this academic freedom is a gift to us in South Africa. It is part of our constitution.
Mhm.
In not many countries, it's part of the constitution. So you and I guaranteed academic freedom as distinct from freedom of expression, right? And so this is a hard fought for and won battle. Institutional autonomy is part of our policy framework, both of universities maintaining a distance from the state while still being accountable, right? And so we have these gifts, which are gifts of our society to us. These gifts don't exist everywhere, right?
Mhm.
And yet it hurts when we don't make use of these incredible gifts that our constitution provides us to speak out against violence and genocide and suicide and so on. So I don't want to belittle the fact that our universities are also hamstrung. They are
Mhm.
not being funded to the extent that they should be, like many of our public institutions. And therefore, vice chancellors have to think seriously about how they're going to balance the budgets, how they're going
Mhm.
to find scholarships for students who are needy, to do the kinds of research we need to do, which big business may not be interested in, the corporates
Right.
will not fund, and so on.
Yeah. So I'm
And
glad you're
so
bringing
that,
the yeah. I'm glad you're bringing the discussion back to the universities because that's really what I want to focus on in the next two or three questions. What specific actions or statements do you believe South African universities and their leadership should prioritize to make a meaningful impact in this context? How should South African universities navigate their ties with Western institutions that support Israel, particularly in terms of research funding and partnerships?
right. So my starting point really is to say our constitution and our higher education values and policies, which I'm very familiar with, having been head of the advisory body to the minister, Kader Asmal, and then Naledi Pandor for 7 years, that we have the responsibility to speak out about genocide and scholasticide in Palestine and everywhere. That we have a duty in South Africa to extend solidarity to people fighting for freedom in settler colonial societies like Israel. It is a settler colonial apartheid society, right? Our university and representative bodies like USAF and the Academy of Science should at the least be calling for a ceasefire. Even this, many of them have failed to do. We should be extending material support to Palestinian universities, scholars, and students, like others did when we fought our apartheid system. I and many others are beneficiaries of those scholarships at overseas universities. We should be embracing the academic boycott of Israeli institutions, which is an integral part of Israeli apartheid and its reproduction. Like most universities were in South Africa under apartheid, we're familiar with these things. We should be working with Palestinian institutions, taking the lead to think about the reconstruction, the renewal of higher education in Palestine, not just physically, but intellectually. There's a lot we should be doing. It's sad that we are not doing that. We're cutting ourselves out from that.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think South African institutions that benefited from the global solidarity during apartheid now hesitate to extend similar solidarity to Palestinians? What pressures do you think are influencing their decisions and their hesitation?
So, I think we need a discussion around that because there are a lot of speculation around this, right? So, firstly, I think some universities really think that they should not be involved in politics, and this is politics.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I agree, we should not be involved in party politics, but politics with a small p. Of course, we cannot stay out of that because politics with a small p is really ultimately about what kind of social relations you want in your society. What kind of society do you want? Do you want a society that is egalitarian, where everyone has opportunities, can lead decent life? Or do you want the society that we have, where the wealthy do incredibly well, but 66% of families today are food stressed? The malnutrition rate in South Africa is 27%. That's political issues. It's not party political. How can we keep quiet about those things? We should be at the forefront as universities who are working with the state and other institutions to address those kinds of issues. That's the research we can do. That's the interventions we can shape and so on. So I don't buy this argument that we must stay out of politics, firstly. That's a problem of leadership of the universities, as far as I'm concerned, that they are not leading around these issues. The second one is, look, over 60% of academics in South Africa today are on contracts. Contracts make people far more circumspect. You cannot really enjoy your academic freedom when you're on a contract, worrying about whether you're going to get another contract next year, whether you're going to satisfy the head of department and the university and so on. Contracts are bad news because it curtails and constrains people to speak openly when they're worried about their jobs all the time, right? And so therefore, I think we must be empathetic. A whole lot of people keep quiet. They keep their heads down because they are trying to struggle and survive at our universities. They're not thriving necessarily because they're on contracts all the time, right?
Right.
Thirdly, our universities are microcosm of our society. The fact that people have PhDs doesn't mean they necessarily always operate according to certain values and rationally and so on. Okay? They are no different from people who we can call rank and file people in society. So those politics in our society play themselves out at universities.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are fundamentalists at our universities. Hard to believe, right? Whether they are Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu. But they're fundamentalists, right? And that politics comes into our universities, right? So at that level also, some people may be Zionists. It's part of their DNA. It's part of their cultural and religious. And so these things are also fighting themselves out at our universities at the moment. Perhaps some of our leadership is finding themselves torn between their beliefs and so on, and what's being demanded of them right now. So I think there are many complicated reasons why we find ourselves in this situation. It's complicated, but we must cut through this to try and establish what is it precisely that is holding back some institutions. Why is it that UWC can do what it does, but WITS is very shy of taking a stand? Okay.
UWC is the
So
Bush
I think
College. Yeah.
we have to speak about some of these issues and their histories also. right? And their lineages
Mhm.
of a WITS as opposed to a UWC, you know.
Of course. So I'm quite interested that you emphasize in your reception speech the responsibility of choice, and you criticize universities for their comfort zone approach. So, in your opinion, what are the consequences of academic neutrality on global human rights issues, particularly in the case of Israel and Palestine? What possible
Yeah. So,
consequences can there be when they
sure.
play
So,
a neutral role?
so both at the level of individuals and at the level of institutions, and especially universities, what does neutrality mean really? I don't buy that there's value free research where our values don't shape even the questions we ask. My values shape the fact that I write the books I do. The research questions I ask are shaped by my values. The idea of creating a decent society where everyone can thrive and no one goes to bed hungry and things like that. Now, when you talk about these things in this way, people think you're crazy. Why are we crazy? We can produce enough food in the world to feed everyone. It's because of the massive inequalities we have that people go to bed hungry. It's privilege and disadvantage that is driving the inequality and poverty in South Africa and around the world. It's getting worse in some cases, these inequalities. And these inequalities are also desensitizing those who are really rich and wealthy. They imagine they live on their own planets. They
Mhm.
seem to be completely closed to the cries of suffering. The
Disconnected.
27% malnutrition I'm talking about, the
Mhm.
66% food stress families in South Africa. We can do things about that, right? But we seem to be turning a blind eye to that, whether it's business or the state, right?
Yeah. So
So
those
this
yeah.
question of neutrality, I can't. How can we be neutral in the face of oppression, in the face of injustice? What kind of institutions are we? So
Mhm.
that's why I said in the interview, Martha Nussbaum, this great American philosopher, speaks about universities and higher education as the cultivation of humanity. And when we stay silent as universities, as institutions, what are we modeling for our students? What are we as academics modeling for the rest of society? That we will keep quiet in the face of injustice and genocide because we have our own vested interests. I
Yeah.
find that hard to accept.
Now, those are very key priorities, and thank you for highlighting that. Coming back to the BDS coalition, whom you supported with your donation, they are part of one of the primary solidarity networks for Palestinian rights. So, given the challenges this coalition faces in garnering broad institutional support, what role do you think individual academics like yourself and others, what role can you play in strengthening the coalition's efforts?
Sure. So I think we must also separate out here. Like, we have to be sensible and rational about these things. When we took part in the national liberation struggle in South Africa against apartheid, you must not jump from that because I'm part of that, I'm necessarily ANC or PAC or unity movement, right? In the same way today, when I contribute these funds, I contribute it to a body that I think is doing important work locally and internationally. It is very much in the spirit of one of the pillars of our struggle, because we spoke about the four pillars of our anti apartheid struggle. And one of them was the international boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions campaign. We know how effective it was in the case of South Africa, isolating the apartheid regime in the sporting front, in the cultural front, in the academic front, and so on. I would like to think it helped hasten the demise of apartheid and got us to February 1990, where de Klerk was forced to unban the liberation movements and so on because of mass resistance inside and outside South Africa. So, in a way, I'm saying that while I've contributed the funds to the BDS, right, it doesn't mean you can read off from that what my politics are as far as Palestine is concerned, what my views are of the different movements, and so on. What I'm clear about is that Palestine needs our unconditional support, right? Because it is a settler colonial apartheid society that should be allowed to determine its own future. And they will determine their futures, not us, right? We would say to all the people outside of South Africa at that point, we listen to you, but we will be the authors of our own destiny. We will chart our own futures. The Palestinians must be allowed to do that. And we need to support them in whatever they do and not necessarily get involved in where you stand on this issue and that, and do you support this movement and that movement, right? As if those are all conditions, before you can support anything. So let's do the right thing, call for a ceasefire, because that doesn't say you're supporting any particular political party, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about humanity, it's about saving lives. We can't even do that. Then we can talk about the other things. You can engage me about those other things. But right now, it's about keeping the big picture in mind.
Right.
We need a BDS because the BDS is a possible vehicle, non-violent, in order to put pressure on Israel to do the right thing, as happened in South Africa in 1990.
Thank you.
But
So,
whether it's going to be one state, two state, those are separate debates.
yeah, so that's a separate debate, which I thought I might touch on, but I think it's perhaps a topic for another interview on
Sure.
what kind of political solution as an ideal we would envisage for the Palestinians, given that.
One in which they are going to be the authors of their own destiny,
Yeah.
and which is not going to be imposed on them by the failed strategies of the United States and the West and others.
Yes, but also by social mass liberatory movements globally, because even though they might have a view on what an ideal political solution is for the Palestinians, it ultimately is a Palestinian issue, and they need to look at their own self-determination.
Sure.
Perhaps as a final question, I want to come back to ASSAf and the South African academia. What specific institutional reforms would you propose to ensure that South African universities align more closely with principles of social justice, especially international crises like Gaza? And they've been fairly dispassionate about it, distant from it, haven't expressed anything until there was pressure brought to bear on them. But I think there's some kind of institutional reform needed. What do you think those are?
So I think this has been an opportunity, and we haven't fully taken it. ASSAf, Academy of Science, put a committee together. Let's see what report they have produced and whether that report is enabling in any ways, right? Because sometimes people are talking about we need a position around armed conflicts. Okay, armed conflict is slightly different from settler colonialism and apartheid. In the settler
Right.
colonial context, like us, we have the right to resist when people are trampling us. Okay, armed conflicts are different. They may be, overlapping, but Russia, Ukraine is a different matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about a settler colonial society like Israel. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether one kind of statement around that kind of thing is going to be sufficing, I'm not sure. Right? Let's see what comes out. Okay, and let's see to what extent even it's embraced or embodied. At least ASSAf has made an effort. University of South Africa hasn't even got to that point, okay, which is hugely disappointing. And you have to also ask the questions around, in this context, where are the trade unions at our universities? Where is the student organizations at our universities? They have been active at some institutions, but by and large, they've been silent. They've hardly mobilized around these issues. Okay? And we have to inquire about that. What is the state of politics in this country today? Why is it that people are keeping quiet around this? Why do they seem to be disinterested in this and so on? And that's, coming from the student movement myself, having been a national student leader, that is of concern to me. I'm still very interested in student politics because I think student politics are very important in ensuring that we don't get stuck in a business as usual model. Like the 215, 216 student protests, they're very powerful. It reminded us it can't be business as usual. But once the protests happen, we're back to business as usual because the students themselves have not been able to sustain, and it's difficult for students to sustain these. They are transitory and things like that, right? So academics must come to the fore. Then the leadership of universities must come to the fore and so on. And in many cases, they have not. So Enver Motala, Saleem Valley, and others have written an article recently published quite scathing about South African academics. Okay? And I share some of those concerns about why South African academics are so quiet. Why do they seem to be simply keeping their heads down? Or, why have we got to this kind of situation now, 30 years on? I also think it's not only about academics and universities, it's the crisis of South Africa and 30 years of what we were promised and which has not materialized. It's made some people cynical. It's made some people despondent and demoralized. It's made other people say, I'm just going to keep my head down and do the best for myself and my family, and I don't want to get involved in all this. There's a mixture of reasons. So what happens in universities is profoundly shaped by what happens outside of universities also. The fact that universities are struggling financially to keep their budgets and funds high quality education impacts on them when they think about getting involved and taking a stand on these issues, because more and more they are becoming on what we call third stream income. First stream from the state, it's declining. Second stream from student tuition fees, that's declining too. So more and more our universities are having to go to donors, corporates, and I have been warning about this, becoming dependent on corporates and donors, because they have their own agendas too. And I've argued for many years my own view that academic freedom here in this country was more under threat from donor funding and corporates than from the state necessarily,
Yes.
for various reasons.
Yeah. And on that note,
I hear Naledi Pandor has said something similar recently. I've been arguing this for many years, even when I was a vice chancellor. Be careful of this third stream income. It can start wagging out, us.
That's an important metaphor, the wagging of the tail, because media independence similarly can be influenced in a very adverse way through corporate interests. And that is why even what is common between a media organization and universities is the intellectual and editorial independence that we share. So on that note, I want to thank you for very insightful remarks and answers to our questions. I think the role you are playing in academia is one that we hope far more academics would play. And once again, congratulations on the award. I hope the message that goes along with it to the broader public is one that is appreciated well beyond the confines of our academic institutions. So from the Campus Dialogue to Professor Saleem Badat, thank you very much. And we look forward to your participation perhaps on another forum.